Montana Territory, June 1879, the morning sun rose hot over the Bitterroot Valley, and Magnolia Renshaw stood alone in a wedding dress that no longer had a purpose. The white silk clung to her back, damp from the sweat of nerves and shame. The church behind her was empty now, guests long gone, murmuring into handkerchiefs and avoiding her eyes. Chairs still sat in neat rows, ribbons fluttering faintly in the breeze. But the groom, Luther Jennings, had fled before the vows. Not a note. Just a horse gone missing from the livery and a trail of dust down the eastern road. Magnolia blinked against the light, her dark hair pinned too tight, her gloved hands trembling. She had stayed upright through the whispers, the pitying glances, her father's stunned silence. But now, as the wind curled around her, all she could think was, what now? She had no kin left but her father, and he stood across the yard, jaw tight as he stared toward the mountains. He had mortgaged the mill to build her a life here in Derby. Now everything was gone with that coward of a man. Magnolia turned from the church steps, the lace hem of her dress dragging in the gravel, and walked down toward the edge of town. She did not cry, not yet, not in front of anyone. She passed the general store where Mrs. Elkins stood frozen with a jar of beans in her hand, and the post office where young Henry Clagg dropped his stack of mail seeing her come. She kept walking. Past the clapboard buildings, past the livery where Luther's horse had been taken, past the last hitching post. And then beyond the town's edge she stopped. A man was there. He was crouched beside a mule cart, one hand braced on the wheel, a worn rifle strapped across his back. His coat was fur-lined, though the heat did not seem to bother him. His hair was long and sun-bleached at the ends, his face half hidden behind a short, rough beard. He looked up at her with sharp gray eyes, steady and quiet. "Need something?" he asked. She looked at him. Looked at the mule cart, the hides rolled tight in back, a steel trap glinting beneath a tarp. "You a trapper?" she asked, voice hoarse. He rose to his full height. He was tall, broad, not young but not old either, maybe 35. "Name's Quillan Ashford, trapping up along the Yock River, just passing through." She stared harder at him, heart thudding with something she could not name. "You passing through Derby today of all days? I suppose so. Well," her breath caught. "Do you want to get married?" He blinked once. "What? My groom left. This morning I have a dress, a preacher, no groom." Her throat bobbed and her voice cracked for the first time. "I would rather marry a stranger than stand here ruined." Quillan studied her, long and silent. He did not laugh. He did not pity her. He looked at her like a man tracking a trail, like he was weighing something real. "You do not know me," he said. "No. But I know I have nothing left if I do not fix this." He glanced toward the church. "You sure?" She nodded. He stepped toward her, slow. "All right, I will marry you." They walked back into town side by side. Magnolia's father was still on the hill, and when he saw the trapper beside her, his face went pale. "Magnolia, this is Quillan Ashford," she said, voice steady now. "He is marrying me." Her father did not speak for a long time, then he looked at the trapper. "You mean her harm, you will not leave this valley alive." Quillan nodded once. "Understood." The preacher was still inside the church, shuffling hymnals, and when Magnolia stepped in with a new man beside her, he froze. She did not explain. "I am marrying him," she said. "Now?" The preacher looked between them and then opened his book. It was not a long ceremony. Just a few verses, a half-hearted prayer, and a ring slipped from Magnolia's finger to her new husband's. Quillan said his vows in a low voice, eyes steady on hers. She repeated them with a strange heat in her chest. When it was done, they stepped outside, husband and wife. Some folks watched from windows. No one spoke. They did not kiss. "You have a place to stay?" she asked him. "I have a camp just out by the creek," he said. "But if you want to come with me, it is not soft living." "I do not want soft," she said. "I want honest," he nodded. "You will have it." They walked together to the mule cart. Magnolia climbed up beside him, the silk of her dress catching on the rough wood. She did not look back at the church. They rode out of Derby in silence. Just the creak of wheels, the flap of hides, the sound of birds overhead. By dusk, the valley gave way to thick pine, and a small clearing opened near a cold stream. Quillan's camp was there neatly kept, with a lean-to, a fire ring, and a stack of salted venison wrapped in cloth. He helped her down from the cart but said nothing. She stood in her wedding dress beside the fire pit, the lace now torn and dust-covered. She did not feel like a bride. She felt like a ghost. Quillan stripped off his coat, laid it over a stump, and began stacking wood for a fire. "I can help," she said. He looked at her. "You do not have to." "I want to." They worked side by side, and as the fire caught, she sat beside it, staring into the flames. "You always live like this?" she asked. "Since I was 16. "And before that," he paused. "Back east, Pennsylvania, nothing worth talking about," she nodded. "Same." He offered her a strip of dried meat. She took it, chewing slowly. "You still want to be married?" he asked after a while. "I do. You do not know who I am." "I know you stayed." That made him look at her, and something shifted in his face, not warmth, not yet, but something open. "I will build you a place," he said. "Better than this. If you want to stay, I want to stay." The fire crackled. The trees whispered. That night she lay in his bedroll beneath the stars. He did not touch her. Just lay beside her, quiet and still, a solid warmth at her back. She did not cry, she felt safe. And for the first time all day she slept. By the second morning, Magnolia had shed the dress. It hung now from a pine branch behind the lean-to, stiff with dust and river water where she'd scrubbed it clean. She wore a wool shirt of Quillan's, the sleeves rolled twice at the wrists, and a pair of men's trousers cinched with cord. He didn't comment when she stepped out in them, only handed her a tin cup of coffee and offered a nod toward the creek. "There's trout running. You know how to take a line?" "I've seen it done." "Never tried." He crouched by the water's edge, tying a line to a willow branch with a twist of sinew. "You'll learn. Ain't hard if you've got the patience." She knelt beside him without speaking, watching the flick of his hands as he baited the hook with a pinch of worm. The air was cool under the trees, the rush of water constant. Magnolia's fingers curled around her cup, warming her palms. "How long will you stay in this valley?" she asked. "Till the hides cure. Then I'll ride north, maybe up toward Fort Missoula, trade what I've got." She watched the water. "Would you take me with you?" "I would." He said it like fact, not kindness. Behind them, the mule shifted near the cart, snorting softly. Magnolia turned her head and spotted a shape moving through the timber, a boy, maybe 12, barefoot and thin as a sapling. His shirt was torn across the shoulder, his hair matted. Quillan stood slow. "You see him?" "I do." The boy didn't run, just stepped out into the clearing, green eyes wary. He glanced at Magnolia, then fixed on Quillan. "You got bread?" Quillan tipped his chin toward the cart. "There's some left. You alone?" The boy nodded once. "Take what you need." The boy moved stiffly, as though unused to being offered anything. He rummaged through a canvas sack and pulled out a heel of hard bread and a strip of meat. He chewed fast, eyes flicking between them. "You from town?" Magnolia asked. "Hamilton." "Left 2 days ago." "Why?" "No one left to stay for." Quillan stepped closer to the fire pit, arms folded. "You got a name?" "Levi." "You running from something?" The boy shook his head. "Just don't want to die there." Magnolia looked at Quillan. "He can stay." Wasn't gonna turn him out. She rose and walked to the cart, pulling out a second shirt from the pile of supplies. "Here," she said, handing it to the boy. "You'll freeze come sundown." Levi took it without a word. That night, she sat by the fire, mending a tear in one of the saddle straps with a bone needle. Quillan carved a length of birch for a new trap trigger, every motion precise. "You never asked me why I agreed," he said, eyes on the blade. "I figured you'd tell me when it made sense." He paused, then glanced at her. "I didn't marry you out of pity, I know. I've been alone a long time, I wasn't expecting much more. But you walked out in that dress like you'd already decided you weren't going to break." Her hands stilled on the leather. "I saw a woman who didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't turn bitter, just chose something and stood by it." Magnolia looked at him across the fire. His face was half-shadowed, the flame catching in his eyes. "I didn't think anyone noticed. I did." Levi was asleep near the cart, curled in a blanket. The trees swayed above, creaking softly. Magnolia set down the strap and stood. She crossed to Quillan, her steps quiet on the earth, and knelt beside him. "I want this to be real," she said. "It is. You sure?" He reached out, fingers brushing her wrist. "I've never been more sure of anything." She leaned in, and he met her without hesitation, his mouth warm and steady against hers. When they pulled apart, he didn't speak. Neither did she. There was no need. 3 mornings later, a frost came down from the north and settled along the banks of the creek like breath held too long. Magnolia woke early, her back pressed to Quillan's, the blanket tucked snug from shoulder to knee. He stirred just as she pulled on her boots, his voice low and rough from sleep. "Don't go barefoot. Ground's hard this morning." "I wasn't planning to." She stepped outside and found Levi already crouched by the fire pit, feeding pine twigs into the coals. Smoke rose thin and straight in the still air. He glanced up but said nothing, his face drawn with a kind of quiet watchfulness that had become part of him. Magnolia crouched beside him, warming her hands over the fire. "You sleep," he shrugged. "You always this quiet?" "I talk when something needs saying," she studied him. "You got any folks still living?" "No." "Anyone looking for you?" "No." That was answer enough. Quillan emerged from the lean-to, pulling a flannel shirt over his shoulders, rifle slung across his back. He crossed to the cart and checked the traps laid out in a row to cure, skins stretched tight as drumheads. "We need salt," he said, "and fresh needles. The ones I've got are bending." Magnolia nodded. "There's a trading post 5 miles west." "I remember seeing the sign." "I'll head there today." "I'll come with you." He looked at her, then at Levi. "You trust him here alone?" Levi didn't lift his eyes. "I can handle myself," Magnolia said. "We leave him something warm, some food." "He'll be fine." The ride west took them through tight woods and slow, rocky inclines. Quillan let her take the reins part of the way, correcting her gently when she turned too sharp near a fallen log. "Don't jerk the mule," he said. "Let it feel your hands, not fight him." She adjusted her grip. "You always this particular?" "I've seen too many accidents start with someone thinking they're in charge just because they're holding the rope." The trading post sat near a fork in the trail, 2 low buildings with a porch out front and smoke curling from a back chimney. A man with a clay pipe lounged in a rocking chair, one boot propped on a barrel. Quillan nodded as they passed. "Morning." The man looked over the cart, then at Magnolia. "You're the abandoned bride, aren't you?" She didn't flinch. "Not anymore." Inside, the air was thick with tobacco and tanned leather. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with dried beans, canned peaches, sewing kits and tins of lye soap. A woman behind the counter gave them a sharp once-over, then softened when she caught Quillan's eyes. "You're back earlier than usual. Need salt. Bone needles if you've got them, maybe a few cartridges." The woman reached under the counter. "That your wife?" "She is." Magnolia stepped closer. "We're looking to build something better than canvas and tarps." "You know anyone selling lumber?" "There's a Swede runs a sawmill past the West Ridge. He's fair if you don't mind waiting. Supplies are low since the last storm." Storm came down through the pass last week, washed out part of the lower trail. "You'll want to stay clear of it." Magnolia glanced at Quillan. "Maybe we can help him mill in exchange for timber." He considered that. Could work. They traded 2 cured fox pelts for the supplies, then stepped back into the sunlight. As Quillan loaded the goods into the cart, Magnolia leaned against the wheel and looked west, where the trail cut through a stand of aspen. "You ever stayed in one place?" she asked. "Not since I was a boy." "Do you want to?" He tightened the straps on the sack of salt. "Don't know." "Never gave myself leave to think about it." "I'd like to." He looked at her then, slow and deliberate, like something shifting inside him. "You want a house?" "I want a roof that won't blow off in the wind, a door that shuts." "Maybe a stove." "You want children?" Her breath caught, but she kept her eyes on the trees. "Someday, if that's something you'd want too, I might." They didn't speak the rest of the ride. Not because there was nothing to say, but because what had been said already hung between them like something warm and solid. When they reached camp, Levi was sitting on a rock near the creek, sharpening a stick with a stone. He stood when he saw them, face unreadable. "You were gone longer than I expected." "There was a trail washed out," Magnolia said. "We had to go around." Quillan handed him a pouch of dried apples. "You eat?" "Some. Good." That night, after the mule was fed and the supplies unpacked, Quillan set a new trapline north of the clearing. Magnolia followed him, her lantern swinging low and golden between them. "You mean to keep trapping when winter comes?" she asked, for a while. "But if we're going to build, I'll have to split my time." "You do that. If we're staying, I'd rather you sleep behind walls than canvas." She touched his hand just once, a brief press of fingers. He didn't pull away. The stars were out when they returned. Levi was already asleep, curled in his blanket near the fire. Quillan sat down on a flat stone, pulled his knife, and began shaping a piece of pine into a handle for one of the new needles. Magnolia sat beside him, arms crossed over her knees. "You're not what I expected," she said. He didn't look up. "What did you expect? Someone rougher, someone colder? I can be both." "I don't think you will be, not with me." He set the knife down and looked at her full. "You're not what I expected either." She smiled just a little. "Good." The sawmill stood beside a cold bend of the river, tucked beneath high rock where the pine grew thin and the wind never stopped moving. They reached it by noon, after a quiet ride west with the cart half-loaded, Quillan at the reins, Magnolia beside him, a coil of rope and a hatchet between them. Levi stayed behind, left with a scratched tin whistle and strict instruction to keep the fire going and stay near camp. He'd nodded once but said nothing, already carving something into the bark of a fir tree with his pocket blade. The mill itself was no more than a squat structure of rough-hewn logs and a shed roof patched with tar paper. A wheel turned slow in the current, the groan of timber grinding under it. Smoke rose from a stovepipe near the back, and a stack of cut boards lay under canvas beside the door. A man stepped out as they approached, wiping sawdust from his beard with the back of one hand. He was broad-shouldered, clean-shaven save for the matted thatch at his chin, and his right pant leg was pinned just below the knee. He walked with a cane he didn't lean on. "You're the trapper from down valley?" he asked. Quillan nodded. "Heard you might need help running lumber." "I need strong backs and quiet mouths. You bring both," Magnolia spoke first. "We're building a cabin, we'll work for the timber." The man's eyes flicked to her, then back to Quillan. "She swings an axe. I split wood every morning," she said. "You married?" he asked Quillan. "We are." "Then you'll work together, no one else on the crew. Don't need mouths running like creeks." "My name's Magnolia," she said, brushing a splinter from her sleeve. "And you are?" "Folk Anderson. Been sawing here 12 years. "You'll start now or not at all." They followed him behind the mill, where a sled groaned under a half-load of rough beams. Folk pointed to the pile. "That goes to the clearing 2 miles west. You get it there by dusk. I'll give you twice what it's worth in cut boards." Quillan nodded once. "We'll take it." The sled was heavy, the trail rutted with old tracks and slick with frost where the sun hadn't touched. Quillan took the lead rope, shoulders straining as he leaned into the pull. Magnolia walked alongside, pushing from the side when the sled caught against a root or dipped into mud. "You ever haul lumber before?" she asked, breath clouding. He grunted. "No. But I've dragged elk heavier than this down ridgelines." They worked without speaking for a long time, the sound of the sled scraping earth the only noise between them. Magnolia's palms blistered. She didn't mention it. As shadows lengthened, they reached the clearing, an open patch ringed with cedar stumps and the charred remains of an old fire line. Quillan tipped the sled, and the beams slid off in a slow, controlled heap. He tied the mule to a stump and turned to her. "You held steady today. I'm not made of glass." He stepped closer, voice low. "I know that, but I see your hands." She looked down. The skin across both palms was torn raw, a thin smear of blood showing in the creases. "You could have said something," he said. "I didn't want you thinking I couldn't match the work." He reached into the cart, pulled a small linen pouch and opened it with care. Inside was a salve, thick with pine resin and bear fat. He took her hand gently, as if she were made of something far finer than glass, and began to rub the salve into the torn skin. She didn't pull away. His fingers moved slow, firm and warm. When he finished, he wrapped her palms in clean cloth, binding each one with a strip torn from one of his old shirts. "You take care of something if you want it to last," he said. She held his gaze. "That how you handle everything? Only what matters." Something passed between them, then wordless but sure, like the moment before a storm breaks, not dangerous but full of weight. She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her without hesitation. "Don't forget this," she said, voice muffled against the wool of his coat. "Don't forget we chose this." "I won't." They stood like that until the wind rose, carrying the scent of cedar and snow. Then Quillan stepped back, adjusted the mule's harness, and turned the sled toward the mill. By the time they returned, folk handed over the promised boards without a word. They loaded the cart in silence, the lumber fitting snug against the hides and salt sacks. Magnolia tucked the wrapped linen pouch beside the seat, and they rode east into dusk, the mule plodding steady. As they neared camp, Quillan spoke again. "When the snow comes, we'll need stone for the hearth. From the ridge, there's a quarry above the bend. I'll go tomorrow. I'll come with you." He looked at her, then forward again. "All right." They reached the clearing and found Levi waiting just beyond the fire, whittling a strip of bark into a whistle that didn't yet make a sound. He stood when they approached, relief flickering in his face before he tucked it away. "You're back late." "No trouble," Quillan said. Magnolia jumped down first and handed Levi the pouch of salve. "Keep this close. It'll help if you cut yourself." He nodded and tucked it into his coat without a word. That night, beneath the stars, they sat close to the fire, all three of them. Quillan sharpened his knife by firelight. Magnolia stitched a thin seam into the wool blanket that had begun to fray. Levi leaned against the mule's flank, eyes half closed. The wind moved through the trees above, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called once and went quiet. No one spoke, but the silence was warm. The ridge above the creek was quiet, but for the scatter of loose stone beneath Quillan's boots and the distant hush of wind threading through juniper. He set the pry bar beneath a flat slab and leaned his weight into it, the rock shifting with a low groan. Magnolia knelt nearby, gloves thick with dust, sorting through rubble for pieces shaped right for a hearth. "Some of these are too brittle," she said, holding one up. "They'll crack when they heat. We'll find better near the bend." Rocks older there, closer to the river shelf. They worked without pause, stacking stones into the cart in neat rows. Magnolia wore her scarf tight around her neck, more for grit than for cold. Her arms ached from the haul the day before, but she didn't slow. The cabin would need a strong hearth. A fire that held through winter, a place to cook, to sit, to rest. Quillan stepped behind her and offered a canteen. "Drink." She took it grateful and watched the sky as she swallowed. The clouds were high and thin, no sign of snow yet, but it would come soon. "You've built before?" she asked. "Not from the ground up, but I know my hands." She passed the canteen back. "I want to help lay the stones when we get to it. You will." They loaded the last of the usable rock before midday and began the slow descent. The mule moved steady under the weight, hooves careful on the uneven trail. Quillan walked ahead, guiding with a taut lead. Magnolia followed behind, watching the sway of the cart, the set of his shoulders. "You ever think about what you'd do if you stopped trapping?" she asked. "I might have once. Didn't seem worth it. And now," he looked back at her, not smiling, but something near to it in his eyes. "Now I think about it every day." They reached camp by late afternoon. Levi was crouched beside the fire pit, feeding alder twigs into a small flame. He glanced up, then pointed toward the lean-to. "Something came through while you were gone." Quillan's hand went to the knife on his belt. "What kind of something?" "Man on a bay horse. Didn't stay. Left this." He pulled a folded scrap of paper from under a rock. Magnolia took it, unfolded the creased square and read the rough handwriting. "Tell the girl Jennings is in Missoula." He's running whiskey through the old stage trail. You want him dealt with, come quiet." She held the note out for Quillan. His face didn't change as he read it. "Who'd leave this?" she asked. "Someone looking to earn something," he said. "Or stir something up." Levi said. He didn't ask for anything, just rode off after. The fire snapped in the silence that followed. Magnolia folded the note again and dropped it into the flame. The paper curled, blackened, and disappeared. "I don't care where he is," she said. "He's got nothing of mine." Quillan watched the fire a moment longer, then nodded. "That's settled." Next day they began clearing the soil near the southern pine line. Quillan marked the outline with string, a tight rectangle just wide enough for a single-room cabin and a lean-to for storage. Magnolia hoed out the roots and leveled the ground while he cut beams to length. Levi helped stack the wood, quiet and steady. By the third day, the frame stood 4 walls rising like ribs into the sky, the roof beams lashed with hemp cord. Folks sawed boards fit snug across the rafters, and Quillan chinked the gaps with moss and clay. Magnolia mixed lime and sand into mortar and laid the stones of the hearth herself, each one set with care. When the last was in place, she stood back, dust streaking her cheeks, and let out a slow breath. "It's good," Quillan said. "It'll hold." He stepped up behind her, slid his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "We built this." "We did." Inside, the floor was still bare earth, but the walls were warm, the roof held tight, and the fire pit was already blackening with use. Levi carried in a bundle of branches for kindling and set them beside the hearth. "We'll need a table," he said. Quillan nodded. "I'll carve one." That night they slept inside for the first time. 3 bedrolls laid end to end, the fire crackling low, wind tapping against the walls like a soft hand. Magnolia lay beside Quillan, her head tucked beneath his chin. "You ever think you'd have this?" she asked. "No. Do you want it to last?" "I want it for the rest of my life." She ran her fingers along his forearm, slow and sure. "I love you," she said. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was thick with something he hadn't let show before. "I didn't think I could love anyone again." "But I do. Every time I look at you, I do." She pressed her mouth against his chest, and they stayed like that, the fire warm at their feet, the night closing in soft. By spring, the cabin was finished. Quillan carved the table from a cedar stump left by the bend, sanded smooth by hand. Magnolia stitched curtains from old flour sacks and hung them with wire hooks. Levi helped plant potatoes and beans in 2 shallow rows behind the lean-to, and built a coop from leftover boards for the 3 hens folk traded them in exchange for a bundle of pelts. The wildness never left the sound of elk in the valley, the print of a cougar near the stream, but inside their home there was peace. Levi stayed. He never asked to leave, and they never asked him to. When summer came, he built a stool for the hearth and began carving spoons from driftwood. He spoke more, laughed sometimes. Magnolia found him once humming while he worked. She didn't say anything, just let it be. Quillan trapped less and worked more in the garden. He built a smokehouse from stone and timber, and when the first frost came, he took Magnolia's hand and kissed it without saying a word. They slept each night wrapped in the same blanket, the fire soft against the stone wall. No more canvas, no more silence between them, only warmth. Only choice, made and kept, and in time a cradle was built. Quillan carved it from birch, smooth and strong. Magnolia lined it with wool. Levi built a stand for it beside the hearth. When the baby came a girl, dark-haired and quiet, they named her Ruth. She grew up in a home built by hand, where love was not spoken often but lived in every action. In the bread on the table. In the wood stacked high, in the arms that held her through her first winter. Magnolia never looked back toward Darby. She didn't need to. Everything she'd been meant to find, she found on the far side of the creek, in the man who stayed, in the boy who healed, in the child who came like spring after the snow. They lived long, and they lived close, and they never let go.